Welcome to the very first episode of Building Icons. I'm your host, Rick, with Premier. So, how do you build the future of construction? Everything from towering skyscrapers to eco-friendly smart homes, the industry is evolving faster than ever. Here, we get to explore the cutting-edge innovations, the captivating stories, and the brilliant minds shaping the skylines of tomorrow. Each month, we explore remarkable projects, the emerging trends shaping the industry, and we get to hear from the people bringing them to life. For our debut episode, we're kicking things off with Mark Vega. He's the Senior VP of Operations at Higley Construction, where he keeps projects running like a well-oiled machine, from the job site to the boardroom. Now, Mark has been with Higley for over a decade, climbing from the ranks of project manager to the top of the operations ladder. So, if there's a way to make a build more efficient, he's probably seen it or invented it. Let's get into it. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So Higley is an iconic company. Your organization has been in business for about 100 years, right? That's a long storied history. And I'm curious, what do you think is the secret to maintaining relevance and leadership in the industry for such a lengthy period of time?
I think there's two main aspects. One is adapting to the times. Construction is the same since the 50s. But the people are not the same. Right. The business around it is not the same. And you have to adapt to who you have working for you and who you're working for. The second aspect I think is really important is diversifying into different market segments. The economy goes up and down, and so does the construction industry. And if you don't adapt, you're going to die.
Yeah. And you talked about how the industry is evolving and changing. So, for example, construction itself may not have changed, but the technology is pushing the industry forward. What are some of those emerging trends that you see that are driving construction forward?
So a new one that we just started using in the last year is robotic layout of our buildings.
Fascinating.
So an interior build out, we have a robot that will lay out the walls, the ductwork, the lighting on the floor. And then when the trades come in, they don't even need a tape measure. They just put the studs down and they go to town. They transfer up and they install the lights and the ductwork in the ceiling. So it's a really cool technology. It's been around for probably 10 years, but really starting to grow in the last year or so. And it's something that we've invested in, and we really are finding it to be a time saver as well as finding issues earlier in the project.
And so I'm curious about robotics. So what are some of the limitations that a robot might have versus, say, the human touch?
So one of the biggest ones is it can't think. You still need the human to think. Yeah. When you're laying out that wall, you got to think, is this room right? Just because it's on paper that way doesn't mean it's supposed to be that way. And so having that critical thinker along with the robot is what makes it even better.
So human oversight, there's no replacement for it.
No replacement.
Cool. That's so interesting. So I want to shift gears a little bit in terms of talking about some iconic buildings and iconic projects that Higley has worked on. And Key Tower in Cleveland, it's Cleveland's tallest building, standing 57 stories. Yep. And you guys did an active renovation for the Benesh headquarters project, right? So what was one of the biggest challenges of renovating an existing skyscraper, with all the activity and the daily hustle and bustle that's taking place?
So working in any active building is a challenge. You got tenants above you, tenants below you. You have to get into their space to do part of your work. The thing about Key Towers, we have a great long-standing relationship with them. While we did that project, we were doing 2 other projects in the building also. Plus, there was 2 other contractors working in the building. So multiple floors going on. So freight elevator is the number one aspect. Trying to coordinate deliveries so that when the guys show up on site, they have the materials they need to build. And then noise is another big one. You don't want to shut down that tenant above you or below you because you're making too much noise. In that building alone, it helped us because over my career, I've renovated over 30 floors in that building over my 25 years plus working there. So it really helps knowing the building, knowing the people, and having that relationship with the tenants. They understand you're doing construction. It is going to end. Yeah. We just got to get to the end.
Yeah. No, Key Tower is obviously an iconic building. Everybody knows it. The Benesh headquarters is a beautiful renovation. Like, what was that moment that you stepped back and you thought, wow, like we actually built this in terms of like design and engineering?
So Benesh started the project probably a little later than they should have and really condensed the time frame for construction. So building out 8 floors in 8 months is a real challenge, even especially because it's a law firm space, which is much higher levels of finishes. Yeah. And so putting together the right team is critical. And probably halfway through the job, when I was sitting in a job meeting and I was listening to the collaboration between the design team, our team, and the owner, I was like, okay, this is going to happen because everybody had the same goal in mind. They all wanted to meet that deadline.
Right.
So that was the time that I really realized it was about halfway through the job. I was like, we're going to get there.
Right. And you obviously touched on some of the, active challenges that come with renovating, an active building. Was there a close call moment where quick thinking saved the day?
So one of the things we had to do was cut out a section of the floor for a stair to go between multiple floors. Mm-hmm. And you're basically taking out the integrity of the building when you do that.
Right.
And so anytime you do that, that's a critical aspect, and how you execute that, because while you're cutting that concrete out, you're pouring water on the floor, knowing there's an occupied tenant before you. So anytime you take out structure of a 57-story building, you're always a little leery about what's going to happen. What are the impacts? What are the long-term impacts? And once we got through that phase, which is at the beginning of the job, that's always a relief to get that completed.
Sounds like you had a few moments where you were actually sweating just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Done it a few times, though, so we're used to it.
That keeps you on your toes.
Of course.
So one of the things that I'm thinking is that office spaces have evolved very dramatically in recent years. There's a lot of design ethos that goes into them. Specifically about design, I touched on what a beautiful renovation the Benesh HQ is. What design choices in that project do you think reflect the future of how we work and how offices work?
So the interesting thing about a lot of office space renovations going on now is this debate between private offices and open collaboration space. COVID changed that drastically.
Like the hoteling stations,
100%.
right? Yeah.
Everything was going open office, hoteling, and then COVID hit. And then companies started going, well, we need to switch back to private offices to keep people apart.
Right.
And so there's this tear between the inner office politics of what do we want? And so that's one of the biggest challenges in the commercial office space. The other one is companies are trying to stay internal. They want to make their office a place people want to come to work, because the remote work now has also changed the dynamics.
Right.
So one thing Benesh has done, and the design firm that did the project really was instrumental, is they put a bar in their space. And so from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., it's a coffee bar.
Cool.
From 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., it's a happy hour bar. And so it really keeps their employees in the office, and it invites their clients to come there to meet with their staff rather than having to go somewhere else.
So it almost becomes a destination.
It does.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd love to work in a place like that.
Yeah, me too. Not too good in construction, though, to have alcohol floating around.
Constant happy hour might be a productivity issue,
yes.
right? Absolutely. What's an upcoming construction technology, because we touched on tech earlier, that gets you like ridiculously excited about the future of construction tech?
So one of my big aspects now moving into the role I'm in is being able to see what's happening on all 60 of our projects that are going on at the same time. I sit in Cleveland and we're in 5 different states. I want to know how the projects are going. So the transparency that I can see from the projects through the softwares we use is a big benefit to me. We use Premier construction software as our technology, and I can see everything going on in the projects in real time. I know how much money we're making on the jobs. I know who's behind on different aspects of their projects, who's on time, what's going on. It really is a big benefit to be able to see that real time. And that ties in with looking at webcams and different real time technologies to know what's going on our projects.
So that's an interesting point that you make, because real-time data can affect how you make money or save money on a project. How has Premier's software helped you achieve that?
So just being able to see that we're possibly losing on an aspect of the project earlier lets us react and be proactive to stop it than finding out after it's done. And that's a huge aspect of trying to save money, is knowing earlier that we're having a problem. So when I'm seeing real-time data of where our cost is tracking, right, on that element versus what we have in our budget, I can react to it quicker, notify the team, and say, hey, what are we doing to stop this?
Right. So real-time data has been a game changer.
Absolutely.
Interesting. I want to kind of ask you maybe a little bit more of a high-level kind of, visionary type question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So if you could go back in time and be part of the construction of any famous building in history, like really super high level, which building would it be and why?
So one of the things that's always fascinated me is security. So I would say the White House, just looking at the security in that building would be fascinating, right? The CCTV systems, the security, the access control, that's all fascinating to me. Most people think of construction as the bricks and mortar. And I look at all the other aspects that go into it that you have to coordinate. So I'd pick the White House.
That's a fascinating choice because there's obviously a lot of security and tech that goes into constructing that type of structure.
Right.
Can you give me an example of some of the technologies that you've incorporated into some of your more high-tech builds?
Sure. So we did a bank recently, and we had to build a safe room for the CEO. And so putting in, it actually was old tech that we were bringing in because they were worried about cell jamming. So we had to put in analog phone lines to make sure he could make a call should something happen. And so it's interesting how new technologies was actually forcing us to use old technology in that project. The other one is data centers. You know, all these data centers being built, to me, are just fascinating. When you walk into a room that's that big and it's just servers, and the amount of electricity that is feeding that building, the amount of HVAC to keep that building cool. You go in there in the summer, and if that building gets too hot, you're shutting down half the country from using their computers. So, the data centers, the technology, the security, those aspects I think are fascinating. I've always been into the technology side of construction.
Interesting. Obviously, construction is full of like curveballs. It's all about reacting to challenges, right? On a real-time basis. What's the most unexpected or bizarre thing that you've ever encountered on a job site?
So early on in my career, I was building a minor league baseball stadium. And the concrete foreman walked in and said to me, "Hey, I need to know where the foul pole goes." And I said, "Well, it goes on the foul line." He's like, "Yeah, but I'm putting the footer in and none of the stadium is there. The field's not there. How do I know where to put it?" And so trying to figure out how to locate that hole in the ground 12 months before the actual foul line was going to be installed was something I had never dealt with before. And you get into unique projects like that, stadiums and things like that, it's not something you build every day. So, I was 8 years into my career and dealing with a challenge that I had no way to figure out. So I didn't incorporate the team and ask their general manager, "Hey, how do we figure out where this goes?" And so it was a team effort to figure out the layout, bring in the engineers to lay it out and so forth.
Well, you touched on unique projects. What would you say are some of the more unique buildings that you've constructed?
So right now we actually are building an addition and renovation to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is in Cleveland, Ohio.
Very cool.
And it is a very unique project. It's going to have an indoor music venue that is a concrete structure in a cone shape, and it's being built in a way for acoustics. So they can have concerts in this facility. So that's a really unique one that we're doing right now. And then I'd have to say the baseball stadium was also a very unique project. That was one I was actually the project manager on. So long time ago.
I'd replace unique with iconic. Right?
Yep.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So we touched on earlier how Higley's been around for 100 years, right? What is one piece of advice that you would give to other construction firms looking to sustain 100 years of longevity?
Drop the word, "this is how we've always done it." Get that out of your mind. You have to change. You have to adapt. It's hard, especially as the people in the industry get older, they get more stuck in their ways. Trying to change those older people, which I'm now becoming one of them, is hard to do, right? And I think it's using the technologies and embracing that helps you change. And I will say, listen to the younger people. They have new ways to do things that are always going to be different. They may not always work, but it's actually making you think outside the box.
Fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about corporate performance and KPIs, right? Because that's what you need to run and track the business, right? So Higley's been a leader in construction for 100 years. What do you attribute the company's long-term success to? Like, what is it that you think has driven the longevity and the success?
So number one is client and customer satisfaction. Making sure that the client and the customer wants to work with you when you go to the next project. We have a very high repeat client portfolio. Probably about 75% of our work is repeat business because we do a good job. We give them the product they want and we move on to the next project with them and we become their contractor of choice. So that's number one. But making sure you maintain schedule.
Yeah.
That's a huge one because everybody wants to move into their space on time, whatever that building may be, especially when you get into the retail market or you get into the hospitality market where revenues are driven by them being in that space, right? So understanding the needs of the client is number one focus for us. What is their reason for doing this project? And let's help them achieve that. You get into religious organizations. It's a completely different goal, right? It's not about necessarily the time frame. It's more about the space you're creating, right? So understanding the client's needs and what their mission is helps us do our job. You know, our tagline is mission-driven construction. It's really about not our mission, the client's mission.
You're obviously like really passionate about customer satisfaction. And I'm wondering, can you give me an example where customer satisfaction saved the day?
I would say the Benish job is a perfect example, one that we were talking about earlier. Law firms, lawyers are not the easiest people to work with, right? They understand contracts. You have a contract on the job, right? But construction is so hard to manage. It's not black and white. And so working collaboratively with that client was huge for that project. If we wouldn't have worked together, we would have never got the job done on time. And so their management staff had to understand that. And so it was client satisfaction, and there were definitely bumps in the road. There were tough conversations throughout. But in the end, everybody had the same goal in mind, and that was a quality project by the deadline.
Right. And because we're talking about KPIs, you know, customer sat is obviously one of them, but what other KPIs do you focus on to ensure that your projects stay on track, on time, on budget?
So number one is schedule. You have to manage schedule. So we track that on a weekly basis. I think we're a little different than a lot of firms. We actually do schedule updates on every job every week. Second is safety. And people say, well, how does that get us to the end date? It doesn't get you the end date, but it'll prevent you from getting to the end date if you have an accident. So we have to watch safety closely. And then, of course, you got the financial aspects. Accounts receivable, accounts payable, are we have cost in excess of billings? Are we upside down on the job? And then the number one, cash. What's the cash flow?
Cash is
right?
king.
Cash is king.
Yeah.
Can't do anything without cash. And it's not on our part. It's on the subcontractors. They're the ones that are outlying the cash because they're paying their labor every day. They're buying materials all the time. So if we can't get them cash, they can't proceed with the job.
So as a senior VP of operations, you're obviously a leader within your organization. So I want to talk about leadership, if I could, for a second. What would you say, what leadership strategies or mindset shifts have been critical in keeping Higley competitive in this construction industry?
So one thing that we do, and I've been a huge proponent of it, I loved it when I came to Higley, and I've tried to take it even further, is letting our staff feel like they own their projects. Don't want to micromanage. It's the worst thing in our business because sitting in the office, I don't know what's happening every day out there. I don't know the nuances of the job. So I need the staff to feel like they own it. And that's what we do. We tell the client day one, the staff on the job, they have the authority to make decisions on Higley's behalf. They own that job. And we tell every one of our project managers and superintendent, you're running your own business. This is your business. How do you want to run it? What is important to you? Because whatever's important to you and the client is important to us as a company. And so that is one of our biggest things is giving that ownership to the project teams and not holding that at an executive level.
So it sounds like you're empowering your employees to
100%.
make those decisions, and
Absolutely.
that drives the success of a project.
100%.
Wow, fascinating. Really interesting information. We kind of want to end the podcast more sort of on a fun note, right? So we like to have a little bit of fun here too.
Of course.
We like to talk KPIs, corporate performance, and iconic builds and technology, but we also like to have a little bit of fun.
Absolutely.
Right? So this part of the segment, we like to call it Construction Confessions.
Okay.
Right? We go behind the scenes and, we get a little bit of fun questions for our guests. So I'm curious. In construction, you probably encountered a lot of unusual things, right? What's the most unusual or surprising request that a client has ever made on a project?
Wow. I think a lot of them request timelines that we just can't meet. Build me a building in 6 months, and it's not possible, right? Those are just kind
Pie
of
in the sky.
Exactly. But it's really hard a question for me to answer because we haven't really worked for unrealistic clients. We work for clients that really understand what they're trying to accomplish, and they're more realistic. So I haven't had any of those off the wall, like I think you might get in a residential world, right?
Yes.
Where it's somebody's house and they have those different things. In the corporate construction world and the projects we're doing, the clients really have a better understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. So I haven't had anything super crazy besides unrealistic schedules.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Mark, it's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. You've been so candid. You provided so much, interesting behind the scenes information. Really has been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you so very much for your time.
I appreciate being here.
Now, it's a pleasure to have you. So if listeners wanted to get a little bit more information on Higley, where can they go to find out?
So our website is higleybuilds.com. We just actually launched a new website in the last couple months. So check that out. That's pretty much where you can find us. We work in most of the United States, so we're willing to go where our client wants us.
Fabulous. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Next up, Benjamin Diamond from 170 Group takes us inside major projects across retail, healthcare, and residential sectors. From innovation to execution, find out what makes these projects stand out. Don't miss it. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Building Icons on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a review and share it with your fellow construction and design enthusiasts. Thanks for tuning in to Building Icons. See you next time.